Alrighty, so we are at the last step for this process, and this is what brings this all together. So before we do the actual what's called the workflow for your GitHub coding process, I need to make sure, and this is true for all of my classes, they're all using Node in one version of, or in one way or the other. So the next thing you want to do is, and I've given you a link here to Node so that you can go and see which version. Long-term support is generally the one you want. So this is like the more beta, right? So again, it is going to show you based on your operating system. So install this. And this is pretty simple. Just click on it, download it, and install it. The one thing you might want to check just to make sure, and let me show you, is once you do that, like get out of the editor, get back in just to make sure, you can run this command, and this is node dash version. I think just maybe V will work. Oh, it doesn't. Sometimes V works, sometimes version, but oftentimes start with version. So this tells me that on my local system, I have 10.15.2. And so what this tells me is I don't have the latest version, but as long as you have something, if you already have something installed, I would say something over 10 or over, you should be fine, but it doesn't hurt to have the latest one. Now, this is not a requirement, but this is just an FYI. The one thing, because there are so many different Node versions, the one thing I do is I run what's called Node Version Manager. And I just did a quick search just to look at some of the posts that are out there. And I think this article here talks about it is actually a pretty good one. And this is if for some reason you wanted to run multiple versions of Node on your system. And you know, I think most people in a class like this probably won't need to, but I at least want you to know that it exists, okay? And there are reasons, as the more development you do, that you might want to do something like Node Version Manager, where you can live look at the versions that you have installed and change your Node version. But for now, installing the most current long-term support should be fine. Okay, so let's go back to the instructions here. And now it talks about, and this is going to be, again, where we'll deviate based on the course that you're in, which sections you need to watch. But for this example, now we're at the point where you need to actually have the Udemy course up and watch it. And actually, I think all of the courses that we're doing this coming semester walk through a Node install. And again, it's pretty straightforward. So once you're actually through that, and let's just say right now, let me just show you that I was going to actually write the one line. Oh, and this is important too. Like, you know, I'd already set up I already had my directory set up for, in this case, boot camp. It might be Node course. It might be React course, whatever you're taking. But then I'm going to set up, now that I'm selected this current directory, I'm going to set up a file. And again, this is where you follow whatever your assigned sections for this course are. And then in here, right, I'm going to do the most simple simple code, and the most logical and the most used first line of code that you write, which is a hello world. And so once you have this in here, now I have my particular editor set up to do what's called autosave. And I recommend doing that. That way you don't have to write code and then go save it. But the other thing you can show that, if you noticed, is as soon as I wrote code, VS Code actually helped me give me a visual cue that I had code that had been changed. So now what I want to do is first, two things really. I want to run this code, and then I want to push this code out to GitHub, okay? So first, in order for me to run this code, I need to be in the directory wherever I've created the file. So in this case, let me just clear this real quick and do an ls. Notice I am not in this example in that directory. So I would want to, and this is where I showed you earlier, I'm just going to type J, hit tab, and it's going to find the only folder that matches my search in this case. So it makes it just easier, right? So if I change into this directory and I do a list, I do see that hello world. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually run the code. So I'm going to do node. And again, even though you're taking client side, server side, React, there's something else we do in React. So we'll talk about that in that course. But in general, you run node, and then you run the name of the file. And this again is where your tab makes your life easier. So when I do that, I get the output of that, right? So I know that I have the code working. It works fine. We talk more about what each of these things are doing in more detail. But in this case, I'm just showing you how to run the code. So now what you want to do is you want to show me that you've created this code, and they'll be more involved in how much code you write and how you submit this. We'll talk about that in a little while. But before you do this step, I do want to take you back here for just a second. Before you do these commands, and these are the commands that we'll do to actually push your code, or before we push, to add your code to the local repo. That's what this does. Commit your code into the local repo, and then git push pushes your code to GitHub. So before you do that, I just recommend, especially if this is the first time you've had Git installed, then you just can copy and paste these commands and put in whatever your username and your email is here. That will just make the next commands hopefully more successful, but you could have a variety of messages come out depending on what happened in your local system, right? So, but if you do those, I think it should set you up for success. So one of the things you want to learn is git status. So git status says, oh, okay, you have a file, and in this case, we know we created a new file. It's not tracked because it's a file we never had before. So the first thing it wants you, and it even gives you these nice little hints. So read the command, the output of the commands on the command line, because it will often try to give you clues. So in this case, I'm going to do a git add, as it's saying right here, but I'm going to do it because I could just add this file. But in general, because I may have multiple files, I do something called star wildcard to add any file that I've changed. Now, this is directory specific, so you have to change into the directory that you want to do this in. This command would not work if I was in a different directory that I'm in. But now if I do git status, and I'm using my up arrows to get back to the command that I've done in the past, now I see that that file is green, matching more of what VS Code is showing here. So, and now I'm going to do a git commit. Now this, you saw the commit on the web interface as we did at the beginning when we modified the git ignore file, but now we're doing it at the command line. And I recommend you use the command line for this. And in general, I'll just tell you why, is that if you move forward in this career and you end up doing maybe some kind of coding interview, there will be a chance that they'll ask you to actually show that you know Git or that you know the command line. So the sooner you get used to it, the better. And what that really alludes to is the fact that you can actually do this stuff through the editor, but learning how to do it at the command line is better. So I'm going to say something like creating new file for section 1 and 2. Now, in this case, there is actually going to be, and I will show you this as a last part of this, the last part of this assignment, and for ongoing, every time you have lectures, is I want you to actually commit and tell me which videos you're finishing. And in this case, because we finished 2 sections, and I want you to commit after each video as well. Okay. So, and the reason that is that I can see your coding progress. Okay. So now that I've committed, notice that my local system now is not showing any green. So I've committed these files into my local, and I'm just going to clear this real quick, which by the way, you can see the commands. One was inserted into the local repo. I'm going to clear this because what I want to show you now is the last part of this particular workflow, which is actually to do a push. And I want to just show you based on the fact of, if I go back out to GitHub right now and I go to that private repo and I go into that JS directory, I will see that there's not that hello world file because what I've been doing this whole time is local. And so by committing it into my local version control, this is what we're describing to you about understanding the Git workflow. Now we're going to actually push this code, and there's actually a command, git push. Now this is where you might get a little feedback on the command line. So after you do the command, stop and take a look and see if you had anything. And if you need help, please reach out. But when I do git push here, it's actually going to ask me to log in, which I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Because there is a way to not have to do this every time, I believe. Okay, cool. So it took just a second. I can see that it successfully did that. And the other way I can see that it did is go back out here, refresh my file or my folder, and I can see that particular file has been pushed to GitHub. Okay, so now you're ready to actually submit your work. Okay. And I'll actually end up doing one other short video for every section. It might be a little different, but in general, what you're going to do is give me your commits. Okay, actually, let me just show you this. So let me come back over here, right? So in this so what we did here is we did this. This is your workflow. So refer back here until you get used to what those commands are. And then the last thing it's going to say, and I'm actually going to modify this, is I'm going to want you to give me a list of your commits. Like on this assignment, matter of fact, let me just do this. Let me actually go back into the course, and I'm going to switch this to where it's going to be from the student view. So what you see, okay? So for this particular item, right, for this first lecture and for lectures going forward, notice you're going to have all the instruction that I've been modifying and talking about, and then you will have a submit assignment. So what you're going to give me is a URL, but the URL you're going to give me, and this is what I'm going to show you, is going to be for your commits, okay? And there's a couple of ways you can find these, right? There actually is, notice over here, but if you come in and just click on your repo here, notice that there's a couple of lines here. And now in this case, I have more commits than you're going to have. Don't worry about that. But give me a link to your commits, right? So this shows that I actually ended up locally updating that git ignore file, and I coded up that section. So when I'm grading your work, I'm looking at this code to see if you coded along with the assignment. So this URL is the one that you will submit, and then you can make any comments that you want or to me or anything, but if you have questions, generally it's good to reach out, but you may have some general comments, and then you hit submit. So what I will do when I grade your work is I will look at your commits relative to what the coding sections were. And again, that's why I want you to commit after each video. Okay, but for this first one, we cover quite a bit of content, but I'm actually going to end up doing like I said, a separate video to show you that. But in general, I want you to know that's the last, and I'm going to leave this because I'm not going to do this, but you definitely can. Okay, so I know there was a lot to get you through this first lecture. I think it's just really fundamental basic skills, and I know having it due on the first night of the semester can be a little much. I do say down here, though, that if you have any problems with your setup, you are welcome only for this first assignment to actually do this work out on GitHub, the web interface, but you need to be getting some help with your setup, and please reach out and do that so that we can give you what you need, help you get in. And again, you'll have a way to chat with your class members, and of course, inbox me. If you need some help, come see me is really one of the best ways. All right. Again, probably one other last little small video just for each class to talk about specific directory or other things that I need to talk about for them. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.